كل مكان، أهلا ومرحبا بكم. احنا معكم النهارده هنستكمل حوارنا مع سعادة السفير أنطونيو باتريوتا، سفير جمهورية البرازيل لدى جمهورية مصر العربية. حوارنا النهارده هيكون عن العلاقات المصرية البرازيلية، فابقوا معنا وتابعونا. مشاهدينا في كل مكان، بيسعدنا نستكمل حوارنا مع سعادة السفير أنطونيو باتريوتا، سفير جمهورية البرازيل لدى جمهورية مصر العربية. Your Excellency, it's nice to have you again to talk about the Brazilian-Egyptian relations. Thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
Your Excellency, the relation between Egypt and Brazil is a historical relations. It started, I think, 1871 and extended to 1876. Why I mention those dates especially? Because those are the visit of the Brazilian Imperial here to Egypt. It was two times. The first one was 1876. Am I right?
71.
71, yes, and the second one was 76. Can you tell us more about this historical relation in between the two countries?
Certainly. Well, there's something that distinguishes Brazil and the Americas is the fact that we were a monarchy for 66 years. We're the only country in the Americas to have had a king or emperor, as he was known. There were two emperors, Peter I, Peter II. The second emperor, he ruled Brazil for 49 years, so that's almost half a century. He was a man of great intellectual curiosity, and he had a special interest in learning foreign languages and studying history of antiquity. So he studied the Arab language, he studied Sanskrit.
He studied the Arab language?
He studied the Arab language. He used to one of the exercises that he did with his teacher was to translate the 1001 Nights, Alf Layla wa Layla. Yes, this in the 19th century, so you can imagine it's something quite unusual for a head of state at that point. So in order to fulfill one of his dreams, he organized a trip to this part of the world, and he came the first time to Egypt in 1871. This was right after the inauguration of the Suez Canal. He was received by the Khedive Ismail. And at that time, he only visited Cairo, Alexandria, and the vicinity. But he came back in 1876 with his wife and some other members of his government and traveled up the Nile as far as Aswan and even beyond into modern-day Sudan. The interesting thing is that he was an enthusiast also of science, so he brought along some very good photographers. At the time, photography was what maybe today would be artificial intelligence. And these photographers took beautiful pictures. We managed to recover part of his collection of photographs and exhibit them here in Cairo last year, and this year in January at the Biblioteca in Alexandria. There is a catalog that we also produced, which I'd love to give you a copy of, that reminds us that he was the first head of state from the Americas, from North to South America, to visit Egypt. So that did establish, I think, a long-standing friendship and mutual curiosity between our two countries. And next year, we will celebrate 100 years of uninterrupted diplomatic relations and presence of a Brazilian diplomat here in Cairo. At first, this was through a minister plenipotentiary, and then when Egypt acquired full sovereignty over its international relations, we designated an ambassador. This is something that is worth celebrating because it does establish a very, let's say, continuous and sustained partnership between the two countries. That is now in the 21st century, developing in new directions. For example, we have a free trade agreement that came into force in 2017, and I am very optimistic about the next 100 years. I think this will be even more interaction. There will be even more interaction than there has been in the past.
Excellency, you know that it was, or it's really interesting that the beginning of the relation was a cultural relations. It's
that
really something that is stand in the memory and it never go away.
Yes.
I'm with Your Excellency here in your office, and I already see the whole walls are full of the pictures of the pyramids and Aswan and lots of historical places and ancient history of Egypt. So this is one of the things that the camera will get it for the audience, of course. But is this one of the main things that we really or it really started at the beginning when you said the pictures of the Imperial? It was one of those also, or this is the new pictures of the?
No, these are the pictures from the late 19th century.
That's it.
Yes, that we exhibited here in Cairo and Alexandria, and they are taken by professional photographers of the time, and they focus on many of the beautiful sites that one can still visit in Egypt. There are also many photographs of what I would call the human landscape, the population in the Nile, at Cairo, and in different parts of the country. So I agree with you. I think it's interesting that culture played a role in the first contacts between our societies. And I personally always give great importance to culture, because culture is a window on the soul of the country. And when you bring souls together, then it's easier to have a meeting of minds.
From the cultural cooperation, I would like to talk about the trading cooperation between the two countries, especially after having the free trade assignments that we had in between the two countries. Can we know more about the volume of trading in between Egypt and Brazil?
Absolutely. I would start by saying that Egypt is our #1 trading partner in Africa, and Brazil is the #1 trading partner for Egypt in Latin America. So this already establishes a level of importance that should not be underestimated. We have a free trade agreement that came into force 2017. It will be fully implemented by 2026, meaning by 2026 we will have duty-free trade between our two countries. And the last year was a very positive year for trade. Indirectly, the war in Ukraine played a role in this, because we had difficulty, for example, in accessing sources of fertilizer. You know, I mentioned that we are an agricultural powerhouse, but we are not self-sufficient in fertilizer. So we import from many sources, including from the Arab world, from Morocco and Egypt. But our imports from Egypt have increased significantly. So the exports from Egypt to Brazil last year increased by more than 30%, and they're today at about $600 million in value.
Can we know more? Yeah, the important.
The two-way trade is 3,400,000,000. So Brazil has a big trade surplus with Egypt for a structural reason, really. Egypt is a net food importing country, and we're a big agricultural exporter. So
the main products that we have in between.
There's a complementarity here between the two countries. The main products, #1 now has become corn, which you use a lot for your poultry industry, for raising chicken. But beef has been an important item. Sugar, although you are also a sugar-producing country. And we have started even exporting cotton now to Egypt. Not the high-quality cotton that you produce, but a more, let's say, a brand that is used for different kinds of products. So
Egypt is importing cotton from
some cotton from Brazil. Yeah, this is something new. We also import fruits, garlic, vegetables from Egypt. And in the future, I think the challenge will be to diversify and to go more into industrial goods. In the past, Egypt has been also an importer of Brazilian aircraft. So not only in the military defense department, we have in the past sold fighter jets to your armed forces, to your air force. And recently, I just took a plane to Sharm el-Sheikh on Air Cairo on a Brazilian plane, Embraer Brazilian plane.
So we have now a straight destination or flight?
Not yet. We are working on that. I mentioned just the sale of Brazilian airplanes. Brazil has a very developed aircraft industry in the São Paulo region. But we have yet to inaugurate a direct flight between Cairo, and I think it would be São Paulo in Brazil, the largest city. All the bureaucratic understandings and the government-to-government agreements are ready for this to take place. So we're only awaiting Egyptair to decide when is the most appropriate moment for the flight to begin. But I think this will have a tremendous impact on our people-to-people contact, business, academia, and also to favor government contacts between our two countries.
Talking about the trading makes me anxious to know, is there any kind of investment in between the two countries? And if there's an investment, can you tell us more about the value or the amount of investment?
I think at this point I can speak of potential for investment, because there is no investment of very significant dimension. The one big Brazilian investment in Egypt has actually been discontinued this year. It was a cement factory near Alexandria. There are many possibilities along you have some special economic zones along the Suez Canal, and our private sector has been interested in that. You know, I should mention that last year an office of the Arab Brazilian Chamber of Commerce that is very powerful in São Paulo was opened here in Cairo. So this is a chamber of commerce that deals not only with Egypt, of course, but with trade from Saudi Arabia to Morocco, with all the Arab countries.
The Middle East area.
The Middle East and North Africa. And they are very active. They are actually instrumental in raising awareness among the two private sectors for business opportunities in general. So let's say trade, investment, cooperation in a wide sense. And I believe that with this office here in Cairo, the opportunities will now become greater, yes, for mutual investment. We would also welcome investment from Egypt and Brazil, by the way.
Your Excellency, is there any cooperation in the field of agriculture? Especially because Brazil is an agriculture country, and here in Egypt also the agriculture is a big field.
Yes, thank you for asking that question, because in fact last year we signed a memorandum of understanding involving the Agricultural Research Center of the Egyptian government and our own agricultural research institution, which is considered probably the most advanced in the world for tropical agriculture. So since both our countries are predominantly in the tropics, I think there is much to be gained by exchanging experience and cooperating in this area. The Egyptian side has actually requested our assistance in a number of fields. For example, although we are a country with an abundance of water, we are very advanced in saving water in planting sugarcane, whereas the Egyptian techniques waste some water more than we do. So this is one area where we can exchange our practices and experiences. Also in cattle raising and milk production. Recently, because of the war in Ukraine, Egyptian has experienced a challenge in ensuring that its wheat imports are maintained at the same level, and the prices have gone up significantly. And Brazil has developed a tropical wheat that could grow also here in Egypt,
yes,
and that could satisfy part of its domestic demand. So, I think there is scope for very interesting and mutually beneficial exchanges between the two countries. Before I mentioned that you have very high quality cotton, for example, we would like to learn from your experience in producing cotton.
So the agricultural research is the main cooperation between the two countries. That's very good. That's very good.
I don't know if the main would be the right way to present it, but potentially, yes, it's a very interesting and promising area for both our countries. Yeah.
Your Excellency, also I would like to know, is there any cooperation in the field of education or the Egyptology, for example, things like this?
Yes, there are in different areas. I have been several times to your diplomatic academy, for example. We have very similar systems of recruiting diplomats and training them before they enter the career. And there is an agreement between our diplomatic academy and the Egyptian, which we hope will soon translate into exchange of students and teachers and maybe some personalities who can make conferences about the two countries and their foreign policies. There are exchanges also in the military field, in the defense area, and this year several Egyptian officers will be traveling to Brazil for language training, but also training in peacekeeping operation exercise and experiences. You know, both our countries are very active at the United Nations in providing peacekeepers for different conflict zones. On the academic field, I sense a growing interest in Egypt for Portuguese language and Brazilian literature. There are some specialists with whom we have interacted, and perhaps this is a field where we can develop further. And there is a partnership that is being established between one large Cairo university and an institute in Brazil, also in the field of international relations. Egypt is a central player in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean and Africa, in the Arab world, and I think we would gain very much from going into your expertise, historic, sociological, anthropological, and all these areas. And yes, what you did mention is actually a field of growing interest. There is currently in Luxor a Brazilian Egyptologist from the University of Minas Gerais, which is a state in the center of Brazil, with a group of young people who are excavating at a temple in partnership with the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt. So we would like to see this develop into a feature in our bilateral relations. And my number 2 person here at the embassy is actually an Egyptologist himself. He had just concluded a master's at the University of Manchester, and he followed these excavations in Luxor with great enthusiasm.
That's very good, that's very good. Your Excellency, of course, during your sitting here in Egypt, you have been around the country seeing the ancient Egyptian history. So can I ask you about the most, the one you like, the most touristic destination that you like here in Egypt?
It's difficult to choose one because Egypt has so much to offer. And I've had the privilege of traveling to practically all parts of Egypt. The North Coast is very beautiful in summer. I love Alexandria because it reminds me a little bit of my hometown, Rio de Janeiro, which is also a city by the sea. I've been to the desert, the White Desert, the Black Desert. I've been to some of the Christian sites of the old Coptic tradition, Mount Sinai and St. Catherine's Monastery. But of course, the centerpiece of Egypt is the pharaonic antiquity. And I think I visited all the main temples more than once in some places. So I've been to Aswan, to Luxor. I've gone up the Nile and stopped at Esna, Komombo, Edfu. The Philae temples in Aswan are beautiful. But my favorite perhaps is Abydos. Abydos, which is a very specific location north of Luxor, where you can really go deeply into the pharaonic tradition and begin to understand, even if rather superficially in my case, because I'm not a specialist, the extraordinary impact that this ancient tradition here in Egypt has had in the history of civilization. So, you know, this is not only something that matters to Egyptians, I think it matters to the entire world. And today, as we confront threats to civilization through war and other practices that I would condemn, it is very inspiring to see how Egypt flourished thousands of years ago through the arts, architecture, and ruling practices that brought stability to the country.
What about the Egyptian cuisine? Did you try something in the Egyptian cuisine, and what did you like so far?
Well, cuisine is a very important part of who we are, of course. And the first thing I would say about Egypt is you have high quality products. So some of the most flavorful fruits that I've ever had, you know, your oranges are exceptional. I'm a big fan of roman, the pomegranate.
Roman, yes, Roman.
That you have here. The vegetables are excellent. And of course, I've tried many of the different dishes. I love the الثانية, and I'm a big fan of lentil soup, so your lentils are excellent. Yeah. And several other dishes. I must say that in Brazil, we are rather familiar with Middle Eastern cuisine because of the large Arab community. So some of the dishes that you will find in Lebanon and Syria that can also be found here, to us, are almost part of our own tradition now.
So it wasn't something new.
So like kibbeh and tabbouleh, these kinds of dishes are very common in Brazil.
It's an Lebanese dishes, but of course, as Your Excellency said,
incorporated
and this stuff,
into your own day-to-day cuisine.
Yeah, exactly. Your Excellency, thank you so much for having this interview with us. It was really a pleasure, and also we had to know lots of things about Brazil first in the first episode, and now hear about the historical relations between Egypt and Brazil. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
مشاهدينا في كل مكان، النهارده خدنا معاكم لقائنا لاتجاه اخر للحديث عن العلاقات المصريه البرازيليه، وتحدثنا من خلاله عن تاريخ هذه العلاقات اللي بيرجع لعام 1871، وايضا تحدثنا عن ابرز نقدر نقول الاستثمارات او بنتمنى انها تكون موجوده بين البلدين، لكن اتكلمنا عن التجاره واتكلمنا عن التعاون في مجال الزراعه، لان طبعا البلدين بيتميزوا ب يعني الزراعه فيهم بتتميز بصوره كبيره جدا، وكان لازم يبقى في تعاون حتى لو كان في البحث الخاص بالبحوث الزراعيه تحديدا. يعني اسمحوا لي مرة تانية أشكر سعادة السفير أنطونيو باتريوتا سفير جمهورية البرازيل لدى جمهورية مصر العربية، وأتمنى أن أنتم تكونوا استفدتوا معنا النهاردة في حديثنا مع سعادة السفير عن العلاقات المصرية البرازيلية، وأشوفكم على خير في الحلقة القادمة، وإلى اللقاء.